Hello, Guilty Feminists. Happy International Women's Day. I mean, it's really a week now, isn't it? It's an International Women's Fortnight, in my opinion. And welcome to this very special edition of the Guilty Feminist in association with MSI Reproductive Choices, fighting for a future where everyone can access contraception and abortion. My co-host for this episode is a stand-up comedian, author, actor. Her first book, Amazing Disgrace, a book about shame, was described by the Evening Standard as an absolute riot. And who are we to disagree? Please welcome to the podcast the incredible Grace Campbell. Hello, Grace.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very well. It's delightful to have you on the show. You haven't been on the show since the late 70s.
I know, it was a long time ago. That was when I started as a
It
stand-up,
was.
wasn't it?
It was. You'll have to come back and do a live show.
Pre-COVID. I always say things as like pre-COVID or post-COVID. That was definitely
You're right.
pre-COVID. Yeah.
Absolutely. BC. Before COVID. You've been doing some incredible live work. I mean, last time you came on the show, you were not a stand-up comedian, and now you're playing the Hammersmith Apollo.
Yeah, it's true. Was I doing I think I just started doing stand-up then, but I was doing lots of like activism work then, which I still do, but more via comedy.
That's how I knew you. But now you're a huge comic and doing some absolutely brilliant stuff. And you did a show recently that really had abortion at its heart in some ways. Can you just tell us a little bit about that, how you turned that into a show and what reactions you had from your audience when you spoke out in that way?
So, yeah, the show was called Grace Campbell's on Heat. And it's funny, at the moment, I'm having to decide the name of my next show. And you have to decide like the name of stand-up shows before you've even written the thing. But I decided the name of that show because I'd just gotten a dog who'd come on Heat. And so I was like, I'll write a show about my dog coming on Heat and like maybe about me and my dog. And then about 6 months later, I got pregnant accidentally and had an abortion. And then was like, oh, great. Now the show title makes sense for like this is a show. So then I wrote this show, which was... it was kind of just like a post-analysis of how I felt about the process from start to finish. It was funny, it was sad, it definitely ruffled some feathers, and it also connected with so many women. I mean, when I wrote about it for The Guardian, for The Observer, they're different, aren't they now? I think they were the same thing then.
They were.
When I wrote about it for The Observer, the day I wrote an article about sort of like feeling like no one had prepared me for some of the emotional things I'd feel after an abortion. And in one day, I got something like 18,000 DM requests on Instagram. It was just crazy. And just not like, I got like a few horrible messages from like far right activists, but mainly it was just women being like, I've never read something where someone's describing how I felt. So yeah, I mean, it was like a really intense show to write. It was like but it was sort of amazing and cathartic and brilliant to connect with so many people. I don't think I'd do it again. Well, I don't think I'd write something about something so intense so soon after again.
Because it was so raw, and you know that article. Anyone can look that article up in The Guardian. It's on the website. It's so raw and it's really, really honest. And it's really about the fact that you can have, you know, very big, complicated emotions, and that decision to terminate a pregnancy can be absolutely right for you, and the right decision. It's a really beautiful piece of writing.
Yeah, it's just basically. I mean, I'm so happy I had an abortion. I feel so grateful, especially at the moment. Like, we're so lucky. It's such a low bar to have to state that, but we are so lucky to be able to like practice that right. But there's so much nuance about these things that just like a lot of the time we are deprived of being able to have, essentially.
Yes.
Because
I'm sorry, you go.
Because we want to be so grateful, and we want to protect that right. And so then it means that we sort of feel we have to be quite, you know, hardcore in our emotions about some of these things, which isn't fair. We should be able to have access to these things that are only to do with us and our bodies, and still have emotional feelings about them and be able to talk about them in, you know, really complicated, multifaceted ways. That was something that that I really felt a lot of people connected with, that I was talking about at the time.
And we're seeing some terrible things going on in America now, with various states saying that they're going to treat abortion like homicide, which of course means every miscarriage is a homicide scene. And some states even talking about the death penalty for an abortion, which seems, you know, from the quote unquote pro-life lobby, an extraordinary thing. It's so traumatic, and also other women who are just being denied abortion care because doctors are too scared to do it unless it's life-saving. And what does life-saving mean? Well, we have to really wait till we say, yeah, we're saving your life, but in some cases it's too late. They actually don't save the life. So we are seeing some terrible things going on in the United States, and that is a real sort of social and cultural thermometer for the rest of the world, or the rest of the Western world, and certainly English-speaking world. And we're seeing, that big New York Times report about the links between the ADF, who were very instrumental in overturning Roe versus Wade, and now the Reform UK Party having meetings. And you can go and look that up in the New York Times, or you can listen to our podcast with Jane Bradley. It's a two-parter, one with Jane Bradley and one with Jane and Elizabeth, who were the journalists who did that work. So we need to be extremely alert to what is happening in the wider world, how it's getting much, much harder in many parts of the world, in some parts of Europe, and what could happen here. And so this seems like a really good time to bring on our guest. Our guest today is the Associate Director for Advocacy at MSI Reproductive Choices, a charity providing and advocating for abortion and contraception in 36 countries around the world, including the UK. She has worked in the sexual and reproductive health and rights movement for over 20 years and leads on MSI's global advocacy to advance reproductive rights and remove legal, policy, and clinical restrictions that can prevent people from accessing the abortion and contraceptive services they need. Please welcome to the show, Sarah Shaw.
Hi.
Woo!
Woo! Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Deborah. Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Hello. Sarah, thank you for joining us. Can you introduce MSI and explain a bit more about what you do in the UK and also overseas?
So MSI is a charity that we provide access to abortion and access to contraception in 36 countries. So we have clinics in all of these countries, and we often work in partnership with the government as well to strengthen government services as well. And we provide abortion services, we provide contraception services, but we also do advocacy as well at the country level to advocate for improved policy around access to abortion and contraception, and also here in the UK. So we were, really proud to be part of the movement that did the advocacy around access to telemedicine in the UK during COVID, and then also buffer zones, and then most recently the work around decriminalisation of abortion for the bill that's going to go to the Lords next month.
Yes, which we hope will pass.
Very much.
Grace?
Is that so? That was the one that was passed in the Commons?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Right.
And it's now very close to being passed. So for the first time, abortion will be at least partially decriminalised in this country. It won't be decriminalised for medical staff, but no woman or other person who can get pregnant can be criminalised for having an abortion. Can I ask, Sarah, why are we talking about abortion today? Why is it so important for gender equality?
Yeah, I think, Grace, before I answer that, sorry, Deborah, before I answer that, I just want to acknowledge what Grace said, because at the opening, when you were talking about your abortion experience, you're doing incredibly bold and important work, is what and I'm really sorry you had such a challenging experience. But to talk about it really highlights what a deeply personal and individual decision having an abortion is. And I still find it wild that nearly 50% of the world's the global population of women of childbearing age, nearly 50% of those women live in countries that either completely prohibit access to abortion or legally restrict it in some way or another. And it's so important that we talk about this on International Women's Day, because restricting abortion doesn't stop women having abortions. Women have had abortions since time immemorial and will always need to. All it does, it just drives it underground, and it means that the rich women with means, they can get on a plane and go to another country. Poor women, or those without access to good quality information, they just end up seeking unsafe services and risking their lives, and in many cases dying of what is something completely preventable. In the last 25 years, we've seen 60 countries have passed laws that have increased access to abortion. But in the last 8 years, we've seen a handful of countries reverse that trend. And prior to 8 years ago, the trajectory was increasing access. But in the last 8 years, we've seen it go the other way. And, we've seen the US with the reversal of Roe versus Wade, countries within the European Union, Poland has reversed access. So this pushback is, it's global. It's also close to home for us in the UK. And, in the countries in which MSI works, where rates of gender equality are very low, women don't have access to information and the services. A great example, actually, last week in Zimbabwe, where there's this strange, there's this disconnect in the law where rape survivors can access an abortion service. But if you're a rape survivor who's under the age of 18, you're considered a minor and therefore are not old enough to consent to a service. So you have to get your parents' permission. So exactly. And, this isn't a country where it's got some of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. Last week, there was, and this has been going on for quite a while, there's been an effort to get some language in a piece of legislation that would remove that restriction so the adolescent didn't have to get their parents' permission. The Zimbabwean Senate took that out last week. Now, we know that the resistance to that didn't come from nowhere. We know that there have been anti-choice groups from abroad mobilizing and advocating within Zimbabwe. For example, Citizen Go, who are a Spanish-based anti-choice group. They had a big campaign in Zimbabwe. We saw other groups coming in as well. So we're seeing this pushback is now global. It knows no boundaries. I mean, and the second reason really is really fundamental. Bodily autonomy is just the most basic prerequisite to having a safe and happy life that's filled with opportunity. If you can't control your bodily autonomy, if you've got no way of fulfilling your bodily autonomy and your choice, you can't make choices about where you live, who you love, what work you do, whether you travel. All of these things will be limited by the fact that you don't have access to abortion or you don't have access to contraception.
Yeah, there's a happiness index that says the health and wealth and overall success and flourishing of any country is so closely linked to a woman's right to choose when and how and if she has babies, how many and how she spaces them out. It's so important because then women can have businesses that they run and they can say, okay, I'm going to have my next one in 2 years when this one's a little bit more independent, and she can do that kind of thing. It's not just about not having babies. It's also about when and how to have babies that liberates women so that they are not in poverty. Has your job been made harder because so much aid has been cancelled from the US for things like prophylactics? Yeah. Has that caused a lot of strain on MSI?
Yes, it has. And I think, to be honest, Deborah, it started before last year when the US government brought in the global gag rule and dissolved USAID. It actually started before then. When Roe v. Wade was reversed, it was a horrendous, terrible decision, which has have a massive impact on the lives of women in the US. But I think is what people didn't really expect. They didn't expect it to ricochet around the world. And that summer, after it had happened, our teams were reporting there was a lot of confusion at country level. A lot of folks were saying, well, what does this mean? Does it mean that the Americans have said that they're going to stop funding health in our country? And we also saw as well, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a very aggressive, loud anti-choice groups mobilizing at community level, spreading misinformation around abortion. In Ethiopia, a country where amazing progress has been made, Ethiopia used to have really, really high rates of maternal death, mainly due to unsafe abortion. Our providers tell me that 20 years ago there would just be hospital wards just packed with women with sepsis because of unsafe abortion. So the government reversed the abortion law, and now 20 years later the maternal mortality rate is much lower. But, even in Ethiopia, in a country where there's really strong political support for access to abortion, there were groups directly lobbying the prime minister saying you need to do what the Americans have done and roll back the abortion law. And that's now having, a few years later, that's really having an impact. Our teams are now saying that they're meeting providers who are saying, well, the maternal death rates really come down. So do we really need to be providing abortion services? We don't think we need it anymore. And providers are now, some providers in government clinics are refusing to provide services because they're saying we don't need them. It's not important because the maternal death rate is down. And they're kind of missing the point. The reason why it's down is because women have access to safe services. And then, when last year, when the US government brought in the global gag rule, which is a policy that restricts funding to organizations that provide abortion, and then dissolved the world's biggest global health development program, I mean, that sends a really clear message. It says to the rest of the world, we don't think this is important. We don't think women's health is important. And if you want to have a good relationship with us, if you want to trade with us, you want good visa rights for your citizens, well then show your loyalty to us by also restricting women's rights. And we've seen that happening. We've seen that have a knock-on effect.
Wow, so there's like global trade pressure. Could you just explain, Sarah, the global gag rule?
Okay. So the US government has never permitted any of its funding to be spent on abortion-related work. That restriction has been in place for like over 50 years. But the global gag rule is a more recent restriction, which means that organizations that do work on abortion, if they want to keep taking funding from the US government, they have to stop their abortion work, even if it's funded by another source, like, say, the Swedish government. So it means organizations essentially have to make a choice. Do I continue my abortion work, or do I continue receiving my US funding? And for organizations...
Okay, so say they get 50% of their funding from America and 50% of their funding from Scandinavia. Scandinavia says, absolutely, please spend this on abortions if for any women or other people who need them or want them. And America has, for the last 50 years, well, by the way, while I had Roe, said you can use it on contraception, you can use it on other medical interventions, but you cannot use it on abortion. Quite weird when they had Roe.
Yes, yeah.
It runs deep, doesn't it? Deep. So they said that, and then then you could get 100% of your funding, spend the other funding on abortions that wasn't from the United States of America, but the United States money could be spent on other things. But the global gag rule, when did that come in?
So it comes in under every Republican administration, usually in the first week. So this time round, it came in a year ago. So it came in last January.
Okay, so a year ago, the US government, and this has been other Republican
since
administrations
everyone
as well.
Since 1984.
Wow. So they say, if you want any money from us, you cannot spend any other money, your own money that you got from someone else, on abortions. If we know that you are providing abortion care, we will not fund you at all.
Yeah.
Okay. So MSI can't then take any US money.
No.
Is that
So
what you're
whenever
saying? Because
a Republican administration has come in, if we've had US funding, we've forfeited our US funding immediately.
So you've only been able to take money from America if the Democrats were in.
And only for our contraception
That's
work,
fascinating.
because obviously they're not able to fund abortion work.
So even under the Democrats, they can't fund abortion work.
No.
Why?
No. It's a piece of legislation called the Helms Amendment, and it was brought in the same year as Roe v. Wade. Yeah,
What?
I mean, maybe
That's
it's an
incredible.
anti-choice pushback against Roe. It's like, well, if we have to have this thing, let's make sure that federal dollars aren't spent on it.
Wow, that is blowing my mind.
Blowing my mind. I had no idea about that.
This
Now
is
I can blow it
it's
even
so
further
deep.
because last
Please.
month they issued what's called the expanded global gag rule. So in addition to the restriction on abortion, they've now added 2 additional rules. One which restricts the use of US funding for LGBT work. So, any kind of work engaging the LGBTQ population. And then they've also brought in a third rule, which prohibits working with trans people. In that rule, there is...
So there's 2 separate rules. One for any queer people other than trans people, and one for trans people.
So and it's the same rule. If you're doing that, you can't take money from us.
Yeah, and they've expanded the expansion as well. You see, originally, the global gag rule only applied to foreign NGOs. So, an NGO in Uganda, an NGO in UK, but now they've expanded it so it's all NGOs.
Including American NGOs.
And
so if you're an American NGO, you can't help gay people now.
No.
You can't help trans people.
Unless you forfeit your US funding.
But hold on a minute. Is that, say you're an NGO that's dealing with literacy, does that mean you have to exclude any known gay person from your literacy program? Or does it mean you can't do something that's specifically designed to help a queer population?
So that's a really good question. The way the ruling is written is, to be honest, it's very poorly drafted, and this is something that the lawyers are currently working out. It's likely that it's probably going to land somewhere a little bit closer to, if you frame your work around, this is around the impact of this work will be improving literacy outcomes, and it's just coincidental that we're reaching parts of the LGBTQ community with that, then that will probably be permitted. But the abortion providers' experience of the global gag rule, because obviously this is something we've lived with for a lot longer than other groups working in development, is we know that generally when organizations are faced with this incredibly complex, nuanced piece of policy, this thing called what we call overreach kicks in, where they just basically over implement to keep themselves safe. So there is because
they're scared.
Exactly.
So
there is a
we
risk.
don't want a trans person on the literacy program in an African country, or in fact in an American state. They're like kicking young gay people off a literacy
this is only applied to their overseas development assistance. But so it's not the funding it's not their funding in the US. This particular rule just applies to their equivalent of the global development budget.
But they could literally take a teen off because they suspect them of being.
Yeah, I mean, one of the rules, there's actually this line that says that they're not allowed to use federal funds for the training of drag queens. I mean, these are not serious people. How is that even appropriate to be in government policy?
Fuck.
It's just so ridiculous.
That's disgusting.
It's just
disgusting. But also, that means a child might have something wrong with their eyes, but they say no, they're visibly queer, or we think they're queer, or there's a rumor that they're queer, so they don't get because there's overreach, they don't get help with their impending blindness. I went to a boarding school here recently to talk to the Feminist Society, a very posh boarding school to talk to the Feminist Society. and it was run by I was invited by a young gay man who was a gay teenager, 17, and he said that he, when he was younger, he said it's all right now, but when he was younger, he was often, excluded or not, ignored by other boys because he was gay and he was out. He was out from the time he was 13. And he said, and I said, well, that must have been really awful for you. He said, oh, it's all right, because I had quite a gay year. So I hung out with the other gay kids and the theatre kids who were assumed to be gay, even though most of them weren't. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, if you do theatre, they kind of just assume you're just in the same box. If you're not good at sport, you're gay until it's proven otherwise. And that's, that is in an extremely intellectual, high fee paying school in the UK, where you would think those boys would have more nous about them than to assume that people who aren't good at rugby are gay. Can you imagine in areas, and those boys, none of those boys need an NGO, I'll tell you that for nothing. They've got very wealthy parents and a lot of access to everything. If you need an NGO, I mean, firstly, more horrendous if you are gay or bi or lesbian or trans, or anywhere else on the spectrum, on the rainbow. But these programs, often designed to help the most vulnerable teens or young people, some of those people are not queer, and they are being no doubt excluded because, well, we can only fit 20 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, and let's not crash the whole program because this person looks a bit different. So who's it going to be serving? Who's it going to be serving? It's going to be serving the most hetero-acting macho boys and the most femme girls, and that again encourages everyone to a behavior, to a homogenized behavior. We should do a whole episode on the global gag rule, I think, because this is opened a real
I think it's really
door for me.
important too, because it's such a corrosive policy and nobody knows about it.
And we should get a US expert on as well to talk about what's going on domestically. I understand the distinction now. So it's US NGOs, but it's the work they do abroad. I understand. So how does this relate to mining?
So the US funding for global health was all dismantled last year, which meant, say, countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, who previously probably, over 50% of their national health budget was funded by the US government. They lost all of that funding last year. So they've spent a year crisis managing, firefighting. They had no stocks of contraceptives that should have been donated by the US government didn't come in. Antiretrovirals, which they would have been reliant on from the US government, didn't come in. There were warehouses of these essential medicines in Europe and the Middle East with stock that was stuck there. And in some cases, in the case of the contraception, it is still stranded in a warehouse in Belgium. And then at the start of this year, the US government came back and said, well, okay, then we want to bring back some health funding. Let's have a conversation about what this is going to look like. And whilst we're negotiating that MOU that would set the parameters for this funding, they were also negotiating trade MOUs, which would have given them access, which would have given the US government access to rare earth minerals in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And so the two negotiations were happening side by side and were being used to play off against each other. The US wanted access to the minerals in Zambia and Zimbabwe. The Zambian and Zimbabwean governments wanted access to the health funding. So you've basically got, the US government are using health as a bargaining chip to advance their own economic interests.
Wow,
which is
quite
grossly
shocking.
unethical.
And weirdly, while shocking, incredibly unsurprising.
That's a really sad thing part about it. I mean,
did you know about this, Grace?
No, I mean, I'm finding it hard to process because it's like, it's just, I mean, once again, like, these things get
Yeah,
weaponized
totally.
and, used as negotiation tactics. And it's just so beyond depressing that these men mostly are going around just using these as like a way to get what they want.
Yeah, it's really
depressing.
shocking.
Yeah,
And the Americans are
It's men
very clear about it. And, in the global, they released an America First global health strategy. And they're very clear. They said, the America First global health strategy is a tool to advance US foreign policy interests and US economic interests.
Well, it's certainly a tool.
And that is, that's what's in their interests. Like that's what we have to be really aware of,
But honestly, it's in no one's interest to not let women choose how and when they have children.
No.
It's in the interests of poverty. It's in the interests of fear. It's in the interests of chaos.
Well, and it's in the interest of men who want to control women. That's the thing. It's wanting,
a subjugated population.
There are a lot of men who do want to be able to control women at the moment.
But overall, globally, it is not in the interests of anybody's GDP. It's not in the things they care about. Like I care about people and compassion and human beings and how they feel and children being raised in poverty. I care about all that. If they don't care about that, if they care about GDP, if they care about international trade, it is in nobody's interest. But as you say, it's in the interests of some scared men who want a subjugated female population. And that is a very, very sad thing that we must fight. Sarah, could you just tell me quickly, why is it called the global gag rule?
It's called the global gag rule because in addition to prohibiting you from providing abortion services, it also stops you from advocating for or communicating about. So you can't do like awareness raising campaigns about abortion rights. So, it seems to be, it gags you, takes away your freedom of speech.
So you can't even talk about it. You can't say the word
and
abortion,
this is why,
or contraception.
Yeah, contraception is fine because the US government has always been a supporter of contraception. But this is also...
Well, they're not now, though. They took the aid away
exactly.
for condoms.
They're not a supporter of anything right now in terms of global development. But historically, up until last year, they've always been the world's biggest donor to contraception programs.
And that's changed.
No, it's
okay, so global gag order is specifically because you can't talk about it. So it literally
and this is why historically it never applied to US-based NGOs because Bush Senior tried to apply it to US NGOs, and they took the government to court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it's a violation of their freedom of speech. So they could never apply it until US NGOs until now, when they're trying again. But
can they take them to court again, or does that not really work anymore in this current climate where courts are just
they could, but we have no confidence that the Supreme Court will deliver a sensible ruling.
How now are you guys at MSI like functioning? Like how is it working with everything that's going on? What are the constrictions that you have, and what are you worrying about, and what do you need?
That's a really good question. I mean, in terms of how MSI is functioning, in some ways, we're kind of liberated right now because, the global gag rule, we knew that Trump would reinstate it if he won the election. And in the past, loss of US funding, we've had to, has had a massive impact on our programming. We've lost a lot of money in the past. We've had to reconfigure our programming. After Trump won, we decided we're not going to put ourselves in that position again. We will never comply with the global gag rule because we're an abortion provider. Therefore, we can't. But is what we have done. We've spent the last 4 years diversifying our funding base. So we're actually in quite a strong position. And our teams at country level are still, they're still able to provide services and, carry on, providing contraception, providing abortion care, doing what they need to do. Is what we're seeing now, though, is, last month, the Trump administration expanded the global gag rule. So, a policy that was there to restrict abortion now restricts services for LGBT communities. It restricts services for trans people. And it's also expanded the types of organizations that this applies to. So that's causing a lot of chaos and confusion in global health right now. A lot of organizations who've maybe not had to navigate this before because they've never been involved in abortion provision are suddenly having to navigate this. And we will see probably a contraction and in service, in the way services are provided from some organizations. But for MSI, we're able to keep carrying on doing what we're doing, but we're also, a byproduct of all of this is increased levels of disinformation at community level. So we're really having to fight against that. Our teams will have to fight against, increased myths around abortion, increased myths around contraception. I remember in Uganda when the US government had stopped funding health and had therefore stopped funding contraceptive access. Our teams reported that in one region in Uganda, there was a lot of women coming to have their implants and IUDs removed because they'd heard on local radio, and this was local radio show being put out by an anti-choice groups, that the Americans had banned contraception, and they were worried that they were going to be breaking the law. So I think that just illustrates like how, these big high level policy decisions really help fuel stigma and disinformation at grassroots level. And in this world of social media, how that just spreads like wildfire.
Wow. How can the Americans ban things in other countries? Like, I don't understand how they have the
right.
Well,
they can't, but what they can do is they just kind of throw out a very complicated, confusing policy. And, our experience with the global gag rule is it's a really complicated policy, to actually apply the global gag rule properly and say, okay, we can do this. We can't do this, but we can do this. To actually navigate that is very complicated. So a lot of
they don't have any rights over other countries. So does it mean that, like, they say, we won't give you funding
exactly,
unless
they attach it to the funding? So it all comes with the money, and then.
But now they're not giving them any money. They're not giving them any money. They give them some money.
The money's starting to come back on stream in a very different shape and form. So, we are seeing some countries start to negotiate health agreements with the US government. So the money will come back, but it will be it will come with conditionality, and that's what we're seeing. And they're imposing these conditions, saying we can spend it on this, but you can't spend it on that. And for a lot of governments and also grassroots NGOs to navigate that is really complicated. So generally, it's what we call a chilling, where they just err on the side of caution and say, well, okay, then we're not sure if we can provide contraception services or not. So maybe we just won't bother. We'll play it safe. So that's kind of how they do it. It's
wow,
largely through perception.
So manipulative.
Yeah, it's very manipulative.
So colonial. It's just just going around imposing their own wavering value set on everybody everywhere. And we know how bad this is for women and other people who can get pregnant. We know how bad it is for children. We know how bad it is for how it plunges people into poverty. In the UK, we referenced before this decriminalisation bill making its way through the House of Lords. How hopeful and happy are you feeling, Sarah?
I mean, obviously, this is a really important piece of legislation because women that were being prosecuted under this were often, women in incredibly vulnerable circumstances, women who just had a miscarriage, women in abusive relationships. And, often, the hardest personal circumstances to be in, and they'd be dragged through these horrendous criminal investigations and court cases, which would drag on for years and years in some cases. So it's a really, really important piece of legislation. I think we're optimistic. I mean, the UK, is a relatively pro-choice society still. So, yeah.
But what do you think, thinking about the next few years and, the influence of like certain groups in America, like obviously this conversation's made me think that like I need to be doing so much more. There needs to be so much more, you know, counter pressure from these groups that clearly have a lot of money and are really good at sort of infiltrating certain people who are like vulnerable to having very anti-choice opinions. But like what could we be doing, what could I be doing to like mobilize people?
Yeah, I mean, I think just keep on doing what you're doing already, Grace, which is talking about it and really highlighting this. And Deborah, the work you did last year with Amnesty International when they published their research on the anti-rights influence in the UK, I think really just shining a light on that and getting that out there into public discourse, so it's no longer, you know, a geeky SRHR, a policy wonky thing to know about, that actually is a thing that everybody knows about.
So the more we can make the message, so the video I did with Amnesty, for example, was a sort of kind of comic video where I started off like it was like a 1940s Second World War video, and I was dressed like a housewife with a basket of laundry and talking like this about the impositions of the far right on women and queer people, and drawing attention to it. So the more we can make it something entertaining, not that it's an entertaining topic, but draw in at the top with something kind of magnetic, something easy to look at, something easy to listen to, the more people can be on their guard. Because I think there are pressures in this country. They're going via freedom of speech by saying, oh, this freedom of speech buffer zone, or trying to get the weeks down, which we know is the slippery slope that ended in the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It's like, you know, this too long, these weeks, ridiculous. Get the weeks down by 2 weeks, by 6 weeks, by 10 weeks until it's gone. So I think we do need to be really, really on the alert here, because we do not have a constitution in this country. So we need to be working with MSI to be asking the right questions, giving out people in our WhatsApp group, our book groups, the right information, not just the people in our bubble, but who else do we know? Who are our relatives who may not be talking about this, may not be thinking about this, maybe think, yeah, we have abortion in this country, we don't need to worry. Who are the people outside our political bubble who don't follow us on Instagram? And how are we communicating this to them? And I think this is something that we can perhaps look at the MSI website and find out our information, and then find ways of sharing it. Our listeners will, you know, want to know what they can do to help. And, you know, Grace has a huge platform now, and she can do these big shows at the Hammersmith Apollo, and I've got a podcast and, you know, work with Amnesty International. What can somebody who doesn't have those platforms do? So some of our listeners have some money, but they don't have any time. What could they do?
So if you've got money and you've got no time, you can donate money to MSI. So if you donated £14 a week, £14 a month, that would help prevent unintended pregnancy. £25 a month would pay for contraception for a girl for the length of time in which she's in education, so she wouldn't have to drop out of school because of unintended pregnancy, because that's a really big issue in a lot of countries in Africa.
£25 would pay for one girl to have contraception the whole time she's in education.
And
wow. Okay, well that's an easy donate
exactly.
for me, because then you go, one person is sorted. 25
and it's
quid.
a no-brainer.
That's going to help me sleep at night. If I just, anytime I've got something extra, I can go, like 25 quid, I could buy this, you know, this top to go out on Friday night, or I could help a girl get through her education. That's incredible.
And then, you know, if you've got a bit more money, £50 a month would pay for someone to have a safe abortion, rather than, you know, risking their life with an unsafe method, or having to carry an unintended pregnancy to term.
Okay, again, if anyone's got 50 quid and they think, look, I was going to buy this, but actually, God, that's going to really, really change somebody's life, then that's an extraordinary thing. Any more, Sarah?
I mean, if you don't have any money, but you've got time, like, go to our website, follow us on socials at msichoices.org, or at MSI Choices, and just sign up to our newsletters as well, because that will give you updates on any up and coming campaigns. And if there are things that you can do, for example, you know, in the run up to the telemedicine vote, thousands of people used our the tool on our website to help write a letter to your MP asking for telemedicine. So, you know, if there's ever an opportunity like that, we will put resources on there that can then help you very quickly write a letter to your MP or provide you with social media content or whatever you need to amplify the advocacy messages.
That's great. So you can help us write letters directly to our MPs. Okay, and that's really important because MPs need to be re-elected. We've seen this now recently with the by-election in Gorton and Denton. MPs need to be elected. They need to be re-elected. If they're in power, they need to stay in power. So if enough of their constituents are saying this really matters to me, it has to matter to them, because otherwise they lose power. So never think it's not worth doing. It is worth doing. It's worth doing, and it's worth writing to political parties that you support. All of that's worth doing. What if somebody's listening and they're going, oh my God, I've got 3 children and 2 side hustles and I don't have time or money. What can they do?
Can I jump in here and say something? I think that something that obviously I spent a year promoting a show about an abortion, so I did so much sort of press around it and was interviewed so much about it. And something that came up on a podcast I did last year that I really can't stop thinking about is talking to men about these things. So something that
great point.
The way that in the aftermath or sort of the process of things that went a bit wrong with my abortion, you know, the doctor showed it to me right before he did it, which was something that I know isn't really advised by like medical practitioners in this country. But like that was a man that did that, and then it was a lot of men in my life who sort of continued some of the like stigmas about it sort of fueled the shame that I was feeling about having an abortion. And so something I've made a really conscious effort to do is talk to men, like friends, boyfriends, men that I've been dating, in a non-confrontational way, but just like opening them up to sort of, they don't know a lot of the things that they should know, because these things are, we should have control over our bodies and our reproductive rights, but men also should have more education on what these things are like for us, by which I mean like cis men. And that's something that I think if you don't have money to donate, or if you don't have time, talk to your partners, talk to your sons. That's just a sort of soft power of influence that like we can all be exerting a bit more, basically.
That's actually a really, really great point. That's a fantastic point, that we can find, again, persuasive, magnetic ways of actually what would change the dial. Because I think for too long, and I read a book about this called 6 Conversations We're Scared to Have, which is in part about this. For too long, we've told people off and then gone, why is it pushing them away? And I think we need to be much, much more skilled at going, what would change someone's mind? What would move the dial? What would draw someone to the movement? And there's lots of ideas in the book for how to do that. But I think that is a great one, talking with openness and vulnerability to the right men at the right time. I don't want you to make yourself vulnerable, but it's a really great point.
It's basically like so many people, so many people contacted me around that time saying that they hadn't even told their partners about how they'd felt like during or after their abortion. I find that interesting, and kind of neither did I, and because I sort of felt there was so much I didn't say at the time, because, you know, we're like, a lot of the time we're conditioned to appease men, and these are men that, you know, make you feel safe, people that you are with, but still it's seen as this really private thing that you go through alone. And that's something that I really like advocate for us not to feel, because, you know, something in my life that I've really observed is one of the reasons that men like aren't very accountable for contraception or like the consequence of these things, because they don't know enough, and they don't, you know, I'm not giving them any like light touches here. I think men need to evolve so much in such a fast amount of time, but I just think that like talking to them a bit more and helping the good men understand like what it feels like to be scared that you're not going to be able to access some of these things in a period of time, what that actually feels like for us.
So we need some punctuated equilibrium from men, and we can all do our bit there. Sarah, anything else we could do for MSI specifically if we've got no time or no money?
Just talking about abortion, like Grace says, is really critical. You know, it gets buried in the shadows because there's so much stigma, there's so much social censure around it. But if we want to get to the point where we want women to thrive rather than just survive, we have to talk about it. We have to normalize it. And this is how the anti-rights, the anti-choice groups, and how governments like the US with their malign anti-women actions, how they get so much power is because they kind of, all this happens in the shadows and people don't talk about it and people don't call them out. So it's really important that we start doing that. Really important.
So I'm bringing up the website now. It's msichoices.org. And there's a really wonderful image at the top. It says choose freedom, choose power, choose hope. Everyone should have the power to choose their own future on their terms. But millions of women worldwide are denied that freedom without access to abortion and contraception. So the first thing you can do here is you can donate to Choice. And we've had a couple of examples of what your money can buy, and your money can buy choice for women and other people of minority genders who otherwise would not have that choice. And I can't think of anything, if I had 25 quid left over, that I could buy that was more valuable than that. MSI fights for a future where everyone can access contraception and abortion. When we choose choice, the whole world wins. So go on there. It's a really, really educational website. It's a website where you could do something really powerful today. And if you don't have any time or money, but you've got a social media account, give MSI a follow. What's your Instagram handle, Sarah?
MSI Choices. Yeah,
MSI Choices. So at MSI Choices. Even if you give them a follow, that's really encouraging. Even if you're not on there because you're too busy, it's really encouraging when suddenly you get loads more followers. So, hopefully some people will follow because of today. You could share it. You could link it in a WhatsApp group that you've got and say, I just heard about this. This is going to take you 10 seconds. Everyone check it out. And you could say one thing you learnt. Like, I didn't know that abortion rights were in any way linked to mining rights. Like, that's extraordinary. And just doing a little Google and 10 seconds research about that and sending that to a few people in your group who in your network who would go, what? And then they'll pick up that ball and they'll run with it. So even if you only had 60 seconds, but you could do that, or the next time you're meeting friends in a pub, you go, have you heard about this global gag rule? This is wild. And you told those people that, and you directed them back to MSI. We could spread the word really, really quickly. So those are some really super, super practical things you could do. And as Grace says, don't just assume you should do that if you're sitting with a group of women or other people of minority genders. You could be sitting with a very mixed gender group. And it'd be interesting to see whether or not how the men in your life respond to that, how the cisgender men in your life respond to that. I think those are all really, really great suggestions. And I'm actually eager to try some of them. The first thing I'm going to do when I come off is I'm going to donate £25 because I know then some girl somewhere can get through her education without fear, without worry, without feeling like she has no choice. And I think that's just such a wonderful, wonderful gift. And it's so much better than anything I could do with 25 quid. Grace, have you got anything you'd like to take away from this that you're going to
do? Well, that definitely, because it's the freedom that, so many girls lose when they lose this power. And I just want to do like all that I can to keep communicating that, sometimes I think in the UK we look at what's happening in the US with like, oh, but we're fine attitude. And I think we need to just keep communicating that is not something we should be taking for granted, and we need to keep energized and keep active. And so that's what I'm going to take away from this conversation.
Is it okay, Sarah, even if people have £1, can they donate that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you might go, well, I've got a pub quiz group, and we say, look, it's going to cost 25 quid. So we all chip in, 4 quid or something like that. Or you're going to do, remember the COVID Zoom quizzes? You could throw a Zoom quiz or a pub quiz and say it costs this to enter because I'm trying to raise money for MSI because I want 1 girl or 2 girls or 3 girls to have access to contraception for the length of their education, or I want somebody to have the choice of a termination. So you could raise money that way, and that's a great way to get the conversation started as well around MSI. To do something, if you're asked, sometimes you're asked to name a charity for something. You're involved in a some situation, and they say, "What charity would you like us to give this to?" Keep MSI in mind because they're doing something super practical and really needed. And the forces are pushing the other way at the moment. The forces are pushing, but there's a real backdraft. So we need to push past that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important takeaway from this is that when, for us to be armed with facts and numbers, like you are sort of saying, Deborah, it's it's not in their best interest, but being able to have those in your back pocket when you are on the rare occasion having to talk to someone who, is ignorant to all of this. It's I want to be able to do that.
Well, I think we've learned some things here today that we can. Now, hopefully, Tom, you can tag this onto the end where we're talking about what you can do. I think we've learned some things here today that we can really actually shock people with, because we've been quite shocked. And those can create good conversations. I think there could be some great conversations. If you're someone who makes Instagram reels that, gets people's attention, the US global gag rule is a great one to get people's attention. If you're down the pub having a chat with your friends and you say, have you heard about the global gag rule? I bet they'll be shocked by that. And it'll start a really good conversation that can be directed to lead to action. So Google the global gag rule, look up the MSI website, and get talking about it, because this is some pretty extraordinary stuff. This isn't the same old conversation. This is something new and interesting. And look, I've been doing feminism for 10 years on this podcast, and I did not know this. Grace, you've been active in feminism for probably a similar amount of time. And you had no idea about this. So Sarah, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing what you've shared with us, because it's really blown our minds.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's heartbreaking that we have to have our minds blown by this. That's the really heartbreaking thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't want my mind blown by this. Don't get me wrong, but I want to know about it, and also
check out the MSI.
It really motivates me to take action.
And if you check out the MSI website, we've got some really good social media content that breaks this down into what's the global gag rule in 5 easy stages. So please go and have a look at that and share that.
We will be sharing that. I'll be talking to Zainab, who does the Guilty Feminist socials, and she will be very, very interested to share that. And I'll make sure that it comes out at the same time as this podcast, because we want everyone talking about this. This is some big headlines you've brought us today, Sarah, that we should know about, and we're so glad that we do. I wish I'd met MSI before, but I'm glad I know you now. So to say your website one more time.
MSIchoices.org.
MSIchoices.org. Get involved. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. Grace, is there any way we can see your stand-up special online, or will there be soon?
People just follow me at Grace Campbell. It would be the best place to know anything that's going to be happening in the near future.
Okay, great. And when that show is available for streaming, please let us know, and we'll put it on the Guilty Feminist socials too. And we could even let our mailing list know, because I know everyone would really, really like to see it.